Welcome to the Startup Show. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Pete Fishman. He's the CEO and co-founder of Mozart Data. Welcome, Pete, or should I call you Fish?
Please do.
Yeah. As you said before, there were a lot of Pete's in Silicon Valley, and now you're going to be the Fish.
Exactly.
All right, perfect. All right, so tell me about Mozart Data and I guess the genesis.
Sure. Mozart Data is a company that my good friend Dan Silberman and I started 4 years ago, just at the start of the pandemic. We are building effectively data infrastructure as a service. It's sort of peeling the onion back a little bit. What we do is we help companies, typically SMBs, move their data, from the SAS tools and databases and CSV files that generate this data to a data warehouse, and then we give them tools that help them clean and transform that data, and then ultimately they do the hard work, which is sort of finding insights in that data, understanding their business, understanding how data can drive an action within that business, and we sort of do all of the rote parts that come before interacting with, say, a BI tool or a data activation tool. Dan and I basically had been doing this exact job for over a decade, just in the form of starting and building data teams at typically early and late stage companies. So what that typically entailed would be I would join a company and they would need to essentially better collect and better understand and better utilize their data. And I would start by either buying tools or building tools, and a lot of that sort of a lot of kind of what I had built over the course of a decade really inspired kind of the same exact sort of tooling that we've decided to build at Mozart. So effectively, Mozart Data is just myself and Dan at the product.
Fish as a service, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how is that going? That's always been like a dream, right? So people think to themselves, okay, well, I'm doing this over and over again at different companies, and I don't know, getting laid off, and it kind of sucks. And you basically said, all right, I'm gonna streamline myself and turn myself into a product. How's it going?
Sure. Well, I mean, be careful what you wish for. So, for all of the folks that want to transition their job into just sort of magically doing it at multiple companies because they see the value that gets generated within the company, they're missing a lot of key steps. I mean, the first is that the company has that appetite for either you as a service, your product, or you as an employee. So I think one of the big challenges, especially for two technical founders, is really figuring out that way of communicating the value in myself as a service. Typically, I would be responding to what is effectively a help wanted ad when I would get a job. But today I'm trying to proactively find SMBs that want to harness the power of the modern data stack. On one level, it's going very well. We have over 100 customers, and actually we have over 1,000 customers if you include our free plan. And many of those companies are getting real value out of their data. We see it in their query volumes, and their effectively in their compute, in the amount of data that they're moving. So they're getting real, and more accurately, we talk to our customers. We actually see the smiles on their faces, the operators that are sort of being able to access and use data in a really sophisticated way that would otherwise require them either queuing up for a data engineering team, queuing up for their core engineering team, or just sort of waiting impatiently and getting frustrated and doing hacky solutions. So we really help these types of operators that are really data savvy spin up the data infrastructure that they need without actually needing a data engineer. How's it going? Well, honestly, their success is my own success. That is sort of the feeling. I mean, it's actually both monetarily true. So the way that we predominantly charge is based on usage and consumption. So there's a tight correlation there. But in practice, the thing that's rewarding is actually, seeing these people really change their careers, their data fluency. And that's something that I've always been really passionate about.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. What's your recommendation if somebody's trying to follow in your footsteps? They're really good at one thing. How do you productize yourself?
Well, it took me a while. Dan and I started this company in our 40s, so
Hmm.
we didn't sort of just overnight really just have a great, brilliant idea, and then we had lived on some level a pretty deep career in the data space. I sort of rode the big data wave where everybody would just sort of constantly repeat those buzzwords, big data, and as sort of data volumes really scaled, so did data professionals. So there was a real influx of people that had studied something adjacent to data or statistics or some sort of quantitative discipline, and they became really skilled at figuring out how to use effectively the big data within building product. So if I were to sort of, start by saying is develop a deep expertise. The easiest way I think to develop a deep expertise in something is to be crazy passionate about it, separate from its, sort of professional endeavor. I spend a lot of my free time, so does Dan, sort of, following sports and a lot of sports statistics, and a lot of like statistics all sort of flow throughout my life. If maybe I'm buying a house or something, and I might go really deep down a rabbit hole of how to think about sort of housing valuations, really following the thing that we're passionate about. And I think with that expertise, we developed an opinionated take on how one does data at early stage startups, and also at sort of mid stage startups. Mostly from experience, mostly from seeing what wasn't working, sort of falling into a few traps. At the end of the day, the best tip is to develop a deep expertise. Typically, that expertise can turn into a great job opportunity. I had many of them in the last kind of 15 years. Also, it can turn into potentially an entrepreneurial endeavor if you can sort of make that jump. But then also it has to be married to an appetite for really expanding your skill set, not in the thing that you're maybe natural at. So Dan and I, again, are both technical founders, and we're really sort of challenging ourselves to really become better at the GTM side.
Okay. All right. What are some of the challenges that you guys have had so far? Being an older founder doesn't sound like it's a lot of fun.
To be honest, it keeps you young. So,
Hmm.
so I will say that I will say that maybe I don't have the same gears that I had when I was maybe two in terms of being able to pull the all nighters. But I think the standard solution to that challenge is you become hyper focused. I would say that there's a lot of advantages to it. Typically, these are funding related. You sort of have a bigger network of both like friends and family, but also of sort of the tech investment network. If you've sort of had, I've had my tentacles in that world for a number of sort of years. So there's some advantages. There are some disadvantages on net. It's always very difficult. A vast majority of founders fail. It is always very difficult, and I wouldn't recommend. It's not for the weak of heart to go out and do this grind a little bit later in your career. But I will say that it's certainly one of the most rewarding things that I've done. So I've been able to get the company started during the most challenging of times during COVID, and then kind of see it grow, and again see the customer base grow. Here, it's no longer me really advising based on what the data is saying. I have a really, I have a tremendous amount of agency in sort of the direction of the company.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That you built it in a very difficult conditions. Do you think that would have been easier if it wouldn't hadn't been for COVID, or was it actually easier because of COVID since you couldn't go anywhere, so you were just coding, right?
So I'll tell you that the first thing that was much easier was actually sort of taking the leap of faith. So
Hmm.
I think that there were a lot of companies, and certainly a lot of maybe aspiring entrepreneurs. And for myself, it had always been a challenge to actually take that final step. I could always talk a big game about great ideas that I had, or things that I'd like to execute against, or ways in which I could add value, or I could productize myself. And I was always right there ready to do it. But actually, like, COVID really sort of tipped the scales and made that a lot easier to commit to.
Hmm.
The other, I mean, COVID, of course, was a terrible thing for the world,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it
of course.
actually sort of emboldened my own personal, professional career into its sort of next step. The other thing was not instantly after COVID, but sort of in the year or two post COVID, the funding environment was as generous as ever. typically what that meant was that a lot of ideas could be funded, especially ideas that centered around a sort of new way of working, where there was a huge amount of expectation on that being the forever future. So certainly that also was helpful to sort of start a company, was sort of the ready supply of capital at that time. There were, of course, challenges. Dan and I, even though we live 10 miles apart, I live in San Francisco, he lives in Oakland, we didn't physically see each other at all the first year of the company. And we spent, I mean, countless hours on video calls, but we technically did not. We at the very least learned how to work like that. So
Mm-hmm.
what that did was gave us some advantages in terms of being sort of a remote first company. So I think a lot of companies have tremendous challenge in this sort of hybrid world. But sort of having established our norms in 2020, it made sort of building a remote first company very possible.
What would you recommend for someone who's thinking about doing the same thing? What's the easiest way to, I don't know, just step out of the plane and hope that the parachute works?
Oh, I mean, I think that's a very personal thing. I mean, I think there are some people who are natural entrepreneurs that couldn't imagine doing anything else. And I think, I've worked with many people. I used to work at Microsoft, and I worked with many people that thrive in a many 100,000 person company, and that's kind of their skill, touching products that hit billions of people, and they like sort of working with a degree of impact and that the challenges that come with that. So what you're really talking to is sort of I'll call it like the messy middle, the folks like myself who, sometimes thrive in a big company environment, sometimes thrive in a really, an early stage startup. But how do you actually sort of work your way all the way down I always call it like you work your way down the ladder. So
Mm-hmm.
you're not trying to climb up the ladder, you're trying to climb down the ladder, adding value at a 100,000 person company, adding value at a 10,000 person company, adding value at a 1,000 person company, 100 person company, 10 person company, and then ultimately a 1 or 2 person company. How do you sort of get that sort of belief in yourself is sort of that's more of a psychologist question. For me, again, I did have this nice push in the back, which was COVID. But in practice, I think again, I had a deep belief in the way that I built analytics at different companies. So I think it starts with a tremendous amount of conviction in your approach to solving a problem. If there happens to be a nice monetization strategy that can marry to it, and you can quickly find customers and sort of iterate by talking with your customers, that's a really great to have. But it starts with really a deep conviction about the way that you sort of solve a specific problem.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Or that's an interesting statement. The idea that you have a deep conviction in the solution. What's next for the company? Are you thinking about exiting? What's coming up?
Well, I don't think having an exit strategy or an exit plan is necessarily ever sort of a fruitful way of sort of going about building a company. I will say that our plan is to just keep adding customers, keep adding value, keep expanding our ARR, and trying to offer a best in class solution, be faster to values. I think we offer a modern data stack in a box. That is really powerful for many people who are maybe SQL savvy or really
Mm-hmm.
great with data. But there are, 10 times as many people that are data savvy as there are people that are SQL savvy. There are, basically, 100x as many data dabblers as there are people that are data savvy. So if you can move to the left, that is really powerful. And, just to be a little bit cliched about it, the best way to move to the left in terms of technical savviness is to leverage uh, the words AI. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of opportunity within sort of the data space and the data world for leveraging, intelligence, of the artificial variety.
All right. Very cool. All right. Fish, thanks for joining us. It's Mozart Data is the company. We'll have some links in the show notes. This has been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And this has been the Startup Show. We'll see you next episode.